Have you ever watched an arrogant fool dig his own grave, pour the concrete, and jump right in? When a 23-year-old CEO called me a boomer and tossed me a cardboard box, he thought he was clearing out dead weight. He had no idea he had just handed the detonator to his own $40 million tech empire. Let me tell you how I engineered the most ruthless eviction in Austin. Hello to the wonderful audience of Boss Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep our channel running. If you find yourself enjoying the story today, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can afford to pay our hardworking staff, helping them cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code right on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link found in the description or the comment section of this video. My name is Zoe Jenkins, and this is how my Tuesday morning unraveled. The conference rooms at OmniVibe Wellness were designed entirely of floor-to-ceiling glass. They called it a commitment to radical transparency, a staple of every rising biotech startup in Austin, Texas. In reality, it was just a fishbowl designed to ensure everyone knew exactly who was getting gutted. At 49 years old, I held the title of Director of Risk Compliance. It was my job to make sure our groundbreaking health tech did not violate federal laws or accidentally cause harm. But in a company fueled by reckless ambition, compliance was just a polite word for a roadblock. When the calendar invite popped up for a mid-morning alignment meeting, I already knew the axe was coming down. The chill that settled over the room had nothing to do with the thermostat. Sitting across from me was Jackson, the 23-year-old chief executive officer and supposed visionary of OmniVibe. He wore an oversized designer hoodie that cost more than a junior developer's monthly rent. Paired with pristine, limited edition sneakers, those expensive shoes were propped up on the polished edge of the custom reclaimed wood table. He did not even bother to look up when I walked in. His thumbs flew across his phone, completely engrossed in his social media feed. When he finally tossed the device onto the table, a smug, contemptuous smirk played on his lips. This was a boy who had never been told no in his entire life, handed millions of dollars by investors who confused youth with genius. "Zoe," he started, letting out a heavy sigh as if my mere presence exhausted him. "We are pivoting. OmniVibe is entering a hyper-growth phase, and to get to the next level, we need a dynamic, Gen Z culture. We need people who want to break boundaries and disrupt the industry." He leaned forward to feign earnestness. "You are just too focused on the red tape. You are constantly blocking our product rollouts with all these archaic safety protocols and legal checks. Honestly, you have a very boomer mindset. It is holding us back. We need visionaries, not gatekeepers." He used the word boomer not as a generational marker, but as a deliberate insult. Without waiting for my response, Jackson lifted a flat, unassembled cardboard box from the floor. It was cheap and thin. He tossed it across the slick surface of the table. It slid and hit my pad with a dull thud. "You have 30 minutes to pack your desk and clear out of the building," he instructed, his tone downright dismissive. Sitting next to him was Clara, our head of human resources. She kept her eyes glued to her manicured hands. She looked sympathetic, perhaps a little guilty, but her cowardice kept her silent. She was just another prop in Jackson's theater of power. They expected me to react. Jackson's eyes held a glint of cruel anticipation, waiting for the tears or the indignant shouting. I did not shed a single tear. I did not argue, and I certainly did not beg. Instead, I calmly closed my legal pad, placed my pen perfectly parallel to its edge, and stood up. I looked directly into Jackson's eyes. I let the silence stretch out, heavy and suffocating. I offered him a gaze so cold, so profoundly empty of fear, that I saw a brief flicker of uncertainty cross his face. For a fraction of a second, the boy behind the mask shivered, but his ego quickly misinterpreted my calculated silence as the pathetic resignation of a defeated woman. I picked up the cardboard box and walked out of the glass room. The open-plan office was dead silent, but as I began placing my personal items into the hastily assembled box, the whispers started. A group of young managers huddled near the espresso machine. I could hear their snickers carrying over the hum of the servers. One of them muttered the words, "living fossil," followed by suppressed laughter. I ignored them, keeping my spine perfectly straight as I carried my cheap box toward the exit. The heavy glass doors slid open, hitting me with a blast of the blazing Texas heat. As I stepped onto the scorching asphalt of the parking lot, away from the prying eyes of the tech prodigies, my lips finally curled. I smiled, a dangerous, razor-sharp half-smile. Let them laugh. I drove exactly 1 block. I did not head to my suburban home to weep into a pillow or update my resume in a panic. Instead, I pulled my car into the shaded parking lot of a quiet, independent coffee shop situated directly across the street from the OmniVibe headquarters. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped out of the oppressive afternoon heat and into the cool, air-conditioned sanctuary. I walked up to the counter, ordered a large iced Americano, and paid in cash, taking my drink. I claimed a corner booth that offered a perfectly unobstructed view of the gleaming glass facade of the building I had just been exiled from. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my personal laptop. It was not a sleek, ultra-thin machine like the ones the young executives flaunted. It was a heavy utilitarian device, thick and robust, built for serious work rather than aesthetic appeal. I opened the lid and took a long, satisfying sip of the bitter coffee, staring at the building through the cafe window. A wave of profound nostalgia washed over me. The arrogant children running around in there had absolutely no grasp of history. Back in the bleak days of 2008, when the global economy was collapsing and financial panic was driving everyone to sell their assets for pennies on the dollar, I made a different choice. I had recently received a substantial inheritance following the passing of my parents. Combining that with every single dime of my own personal savings, I decided to take a massive, calculated risk. While others fled the commercial real estate market in terror, I dove headfirst into the wreckage. Through a meticulously structured shell company I named Obsidian Holdings, I purchased that exact industrial complex at rock-bottom prices. I owned the land. I owned the foundation. I owned every single pane of floor-to-ceiling glass in that shiny office. Exactly 3 years ago, when OmniVibe was just another desperate startup looking for a headquarters to legitimize their brand, they signed a commercial lease with Obsidian Holdings. What they failed to realize was that my leases were not standard. Boilerplate agreements downloaded from the internet. They were ironclad, armor-plated legal fortresses. The document they eagerly signed contained ruthlessly strict clauses governing maximum electrical consumption, structural weight distribution limits, and the handling of hazardous chemical waste. The young visionaries thought I was just a sad, aging woman, desperate for a mid-level corporate paycheck. They never questioned why I was willing to accept such a modest salary for a grueling role. The truth was, I did not need their money. I took the job to be a ghost in the machine. Startups inherently possess a culture of destruction. They break things to innovate, and more often than not, the things they break are the physical properties they lease. By inserting myself into the company, I had a front-row seat to monitor my multi-million-dollar asset. I was the silent guardian, protecting my property from their chaotic, unregulated ambitions from the inside. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. The phone rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. It was Marcus. Marcus was a corporate real estate attorney based out of Dallas, a man whose reputation for utter ruthlessness preceded him in every courtroom in the state of Texas. He was an absolute shark, a predator wrapped in a custom-tailored Italian suit who enjoyed legally eviscerating ungrateful tenants. "Good afternoon, Zoe," Marcus greeted, his tone crisp and professional. "Hello, Marcus," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the OmniVibe building across the street. "The time to take out the trash has come." A low chuckle rumbled across the line. "I have been waiting for this call. Give me a moment to pull up their file." I listened to the rapid clacking of a mechanical keyboard on his end. I took another sip of my iced Americano, the bitter chill sharpening my focus. Well, well, well. Marcus murmured after a few minutes of intense digital digging. It seems our friends over there have been exceptionally busy while you were packing your desk. I am looking at the back-end portal for the municipal utility network. OmniVibe is quietly securing an off-the-books contractor for a massive hardware upgrade. We are talking about a server farm installation that requires industrial-grade liquid cooling and power consumption levels that completely dwarf their permitted allowance. They are preparing to violate the core safety constraints of the lease, I stated, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. Directly and flagrantly, Marcus confirmed. If they plug those machines in without municipal approval, they are breaching the electrical capacity limits by a factor of 10. It is a catastrophic fire hazard. Not to mention the chemical coolants required for a setup of that magnitude violate the hazardous materials clause we buried on page 47. I want you to draft the eviction notices, I instructed, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register. Prepare the breach of contract filings, the damage assessment claims, and the injunctions. Have every single piece of paperwork ready to file with the court. Consider it done, he said. Shall I send the cease and desist now? No, I replied instantly. Absolutely not. Do not say a word. Total radio silence. Let them bring the servers in. Let them install the cooling systems. Let them spend their venture capital building the exact machine that will destroy them. We do not stop them. Marcus, we wait until they turn it on. Understood, Marcus agreed, the predatory gleam evident even through the phone. I will have the trap primed and ready. I ended the call and closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the sweet anticipation settle into my bones. Jackson thought he had removed a roadblock today. He was completely unaware that he had just locked the door from the inside, trapping himself in a cage of his own making. Just a few days after my unceremonious exit, the real reason for my termination became blatantly obvious. Jackson was not just pivoting the company culture, he was preparing for a massive initial public offering to secure that $40 million valuation from ruthless Wall Street investors. He needed to show an astronomical spike in data processing capabilities and artificial revenue. His master plan was to convert the entire subterranean basement of our facility into a colossal server farm. This was not just for processing the proprietary biological health data of OmniVibe. He was secretly dedicating more than half of the processing power to mine cryptocurrency, a desperate, greedy play to artificially inflate the balance sheets of the company right before the federal auditors arrived. The sheer arrogance of his endeavor was staggering to witness. A data center of that magnitude demanded a monstrous amount of continuous electricity and a highly sophisticated, industrial-grade liquid cooling system to prevent the expensive silicon from melting into useless slag. The building was designed as a standard commercial office space, not a heavy industrial manufacturing plant. He was pushing the structural and electrical limits to 10 times beyond their engineered capacity. If the ambient heat did not spark a catastrophic electrical fire, the toxic chemical coolants required for the towering server racks posed a massive environmental hazard. One ruptured pipe could flood the concrete foundation with highly corrosive fluid, creating a toxic nightmare. He thought he was operating in absolute secrecy, hidden away in the windowless depths of the concrete basement. He did not realize that a smart landlord is always watching. When I renovated the complex back in 2008, I personally oversaw the installation of the security and utility management infrastructure. As the anonymous head of Obsidian Holdings, I maintained a hardwired, untraceable backdoor access into every security camera, every smart thermostat, and every electrical meter in the building. From the quiet comfort of my private home office, surrounded by multiple glowing monitors, I became a silent, meticulous spectator to his ongoing crime. I tracked every single movement with forensic precision, night after night, typically around 2 o'clock in the morning. Unmarked black box trucks would pull up to the rear loading dock. I watched through the high-definition night vision cameras as exhausted. Ununiformed laborers wheeled massive, heavy crates of processing units into the freight elevator. I logged every single serial number I could zoom in on. I documented the chaotic, hurried installation process led by Jackson himself. who strutted around the basement in his designer sneakers, pointing fingers and shouting aggressive orders at the tired workers. But the servers were completely useless without raw power. The standard municipal grid connection routed to the building would have instantly tripped the main safety breakers the moment he powered up even a quarter of that massive farm. I watched my energy monitoring software intently, waiting to see how he planned to solve this seemingly insurmountable physics problem. The answer arrived late on a Thursday night in the form of a rusted, unmarked utility van. Jackson had bypassed the city electrical inspectors entirely. He brought in a rogue, unlicensed contractor who specialized in black market grid tapping. Through the external perimeter cameras, I watched in genuine shock as this shadow crew dug a deep trench near the property line and physically spliced a heavy-gauge underground conduit directly into the city high-voltage main line. He was stealing raw, unfiltered electricity straight from the Austin municipal grid. It was an incredibly dangerous, highly illegal tap that bypassed all the commercial safety regulators and emergency fail-safes. A single mistake by that reckless contractor could have blown out the power for an entire city block and caused a massive explosion. Any normal citizen, any standard commercial property owner, would have picked up the phone immediately and dialed the police or the state fire marshal. It was the logical, safe thing to do, but I was not a normal landlord, and I did not want Jackson to merely get a hefty fine and a mild slap on the wrist from the local authorities. I wanted to completely eradicate his corporate existence. So, I did the exact opposite of stopping him. I actively, invisibly helped him. The massive server farm was already generating heat much faster than his jerry-rigged ventilation fans could extract it. He desperately needed a continuous, massive flow of cold water to feed his makeshift liquid cooling loops. The main water lines in the basement were strictly restricted by a set of heavy-duty, digital flow valves, locked down by the master control system of the building to prevent accidental flooding. I watched through the basement security cameras as his cheap, hired plumbers struggled with the digital locks, violently hitting the pipes with wrenches, trying to figure out how to force them open without triggering a building-wide security alarm. I took a slow sip of my hot tea, smiled a genuine smile to myself, and typed a string of administrative commands into my terminal. I logged into the infrastructure network of the building using the highest-level credentials belonging exclusively to Obsidian Holdings. With a single, deliberate keystroke, I authorized a remote override. I silently unlocked the backup industrial water valves and opened the primary flow regulators to their maximum width, providing the absolute best conditions for his illegal setup. Down in the basement, I watched the live feed as the digital valve screens suddenly turned green, and cold water surged powerfully into their complex network of cooling pipes. Jackson walked over, gave his lead contractor a massive high five, and shouted, "We are officially in business, boys." He was entirely convinced that his own sheer brilliance had somehow bypassed the security protocols. He actually thought he was hacking the Matrix. In reality, I was laying down a velvet red carpet, guiding him straight to his own execution chamber. The trap was now fully, perfectly set. Over the next few weeks, he brought the massive system online in stages. I watched the power consumption metrics climb steadily higher and higher on my digital dashboard, 50%, 75%. Then, it finally stabilized at an agonizing 95% of its absolute critical capacity. The entire building was literally humming, vibrating constantly with stolen high-voltage electricity and highly pressurized, illegally plumbed chemical coolants. It was a terrifying masterpiece of disastrous engineering. Jackson had successfully built a massive subterranean bomb. He was currently sitting up in his pristine glass office right on top of it, believing he was the untouchable king of the tech world. All the system needed now was a single, tiny push to send the entire grid over the edge, and he had absolutely no idea that my finger was already hovering right over the button. Exactly 1 month later, the pristine main lobby of OmniVibe Wellness was utterly unrecognizable. It had been transformed into a garish, neon-drenched cathedral dedicated entirely to the ego of Jackson. This was the highly anticipated live stream event, designed specifically to announce the dawn of what he proudly branded the new era. He had spared absolutely no expense. There were elaborate catered buffets, nitrogen-infused cocktails, and a towering digital countdown clock pulsing in the background. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with wealthy angel investors, venture capitalists clad in their mandatory fleece vests, and a swarm of tech journalists hungry for the next big scoop. The ambient lighting dimmed to a dramatic purple hue as a heavy bass track began to thump through the state-of-the-art sound system. Jackson finally strutted onto the elevated stage. He was wearing a fresh, immaculate designer hoodie, holding a wireless microphone like a rock star. The crowd erupted into applause, a chorus of enablers feeding the delusion of a 23-year-old tyrant. He paced back and forth, soaking in the adoration before raising a hand to silence the room. "Welcome, everyone," Jackson began, his voice echoing perfectly through the massive space. "For too long, the biotech industry has been chained down by the past. We have been held hostage by a generation that fears progress. They are obsessed with archaic rules, imaginary risks, and suffocating red tape." He paused, letting a condescending smirk spread across his face. "I recently had to clean house. I had to remove a certain boomer mentality from our executive team. Because you cannot build the future when you are dragging a heavy, rusty anchor behind you. Evolution requires discarding the weak, the fearful, and the obsolete." The investors chuckled, nodding in agreement. They loved the ruthless disruptor narrative. "Tonight, we are no longer just a startup," Jackson continued, throwing his arms wide open. "We are a $40 million titan. Beneath your very feet, we have constructed a proprietary, hyper-advanced biological data processing matrix. It is a machine that will revolutionize genomic sequencing and, quite frankly, print money. We are talking about unprecedented computational dominance." What Jackson conveniently omitted from his grand speech, however, was the terrifying reality unfolding directly below his expensive sneakers. Deep down in the windowless, concrete basement, the newly installed server farm was crying out in agony to make the live demonstration look as spectacular as possible. Jackson had ordered his engineering team to aggressively overclock every single processor. He wanted the data metrics on the giant screen behind him to look impossibly fast. Inside the cramped basement control room, the temperature was already spiking dangerously. 3 exhausted, terrified IT technicians stared at a wall of monitoring screens that were flashing a violent, urgent red. The thermal thresholds had crossed 85 degrees Celsius and were climbing rapidly. Normally, automated emergency sirens would be blaring at an ear-piercing volume, forcing an immediate evacuation, but there was no sound. Prior to stepping on stage, Jackson had explicitly threatened to fire the entire department if any annoying warning noises interrupted his perfect live stream. The alarms had been manually severed. The servers were cooking themselves alive in total silence. While the chaos brewed underground, I was experiencing a completely different atmosphere. I was sitting comfortably in the driver's seat of an unmarked black SUV, parked discreetly under the shade of a massive oak tree at the far end of the employee lot. The engine was purring softly, feeding the crisp air conditioning. I unwrapped a fresh turkey and Swiss cheese sandwich, took a slow, deliberate bite, and looked down at the glowing screen of my iPad mounted on the dashboard. My proprietary monitoring software, directly hardwired into the building's infrastructure, showed a catastrophic energy curve. The electrical grid stress was hovering near 98% of its critical breaking point. The stolen high-voltage line was pulling so much raw current that the underground cables were likely beginning to melt. It was a beautiful, terrifying digital symphony, and I was the conductor. I wiped a crumb from my lip, tapped the screen, and accessed the Master Utility Administration panel. It was time to introduce the catalyst. According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the commercial lease agreement signed by OmniVibe, the property owner, Obsidian Holdings, maintained the absolute non-negotiable right to seize control of all building systems in the event of an imminent environmental or structural emergency. Jackson had never bothered to read the contract he signed, but I wrote every single word of it. With a calm, steady finger, I executed a remote override command. I completely locked out the internal OmniVibe software from the building's water pressure regulation network. In the blink of an eye, the massive industrial valves feeding the basement's liquid cooling loops slammed shut. The flow of cold water died instantly. The servers were now fully isolated, trapped in an airtight room with zero thermal relief. The temperature metrics on my iPad skyrocketed. The heat was building exponentially, turning the basement into a pressurized oven. Back in the lobby, the crowd was utterly mesmerized. The massive screen behind Jackson displayed a simulated map of the globe, glowing with digital nodes. A sleek, oversized pedestal had been wheeled out to the center of the stage. On top of it sat a large, theatrical red button. It was a ridiculous, dramatic prop designed entirely for the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jackson shouted, his voice cracking slightly with sheer, unadulterated arrogance, "I invite you to witness the ignition. When I press this button, our new matrix will initiate a full system boot, running at 100% capacity to map a complete human genome in under 60 seconds. We are about to change the world." He dramatically raised his hand, hovering his palm high above the red button, pausing for the perfect photo opportunity as the camera flashes exploded around him. From the quiet sanctuary of my vehicle, I watched the live broadcast on a secondary monitor. As Jackson's hand hovered in the air, my own finger rested gently on the send button of my email client. Attached to my outgoing message was a meticulously compiled, encrypted dossier. It contained 3 months of building violation logs, high-definition hidden camera footage of the illegal municipal power tap being installed, and a comprehensive inventory of the hazardous chemical coolants illegally stored on the premises. "Goodbye, Jackson," I whispered into the quiet cabin of the SUV. I pressed send. The massive digital package instantly delivered a Level 1 danger alert directly to the emergency dispatch systems of the Austin Fire Department and the Regional Office of the Environmental Protection Agency. The spark had been thrown. The explosion was now mathematically inevitable. The exact millisecond his palm slammed down on the theatrical red button, the stolen high-voltage tap gave way. It did not just fail. It catastrophically detonated. A deep, seismic shudder violently rocked the concrete foundation of the building, followed immediately by a deafening guttural explosion that erupted from the subterranean basement. The sheer force of the blast rattled the floor-to-ceiling glass panes of the lobby so hard that several webbed with terrifying spiderweb fractures. Instantly, the garish purple neon lights and the towering digital countdown clock completely shorted out, plunging the packed room into pitch blackness. A split second later, the master emergency grid, the one I retained absolute administrative control over, engaged, glaring. Strobe-like red firelights bathed the lobby in a sinister, apocalyptic glow. The deafening screech of the primary fire alarms, which Jackson thought his IT team had disabled, tore through the room at an agonizing volume. Thick, acrid gray smoke began pouring out of the overhead AC ventilation shafts. It smelled intensely of melted silicon, scorched electrical wiring, and the harsh, synthetic sweetness of vaporized industrial coolant. The pristine lobby transformed into an absolute nightmare. The polished, confident facade of the tech elite crumbled in an instant. Hundreds of wealthy angel investors, venture capitalists, and board members screamed in genuine terror. The crowd dissolved into a chaotic, primitive stampede. Men in expensive tailored suits and women in designer dresses shoved each other violently, trampling over the catered buffets and slipping on spilled nitrogen cocktails as they desperately fought their way toward the heavy glass exit doors. Through it all, the backup battery generators of the media crews kicked in. High-definition broadcast cameras, equipped with glaring LED floodlights, remained locked onto the stage. The live stream was still running perfectly, broadcasting the absolute panic, the thick smoke, and the complete collapse of the so-called New Era to tens of thousands of viewers worldwide. Less than 5 minutes later, the wail of approaching sirens completely drowned out the screams of the fleeing guests. The response I had triggered was massive and uncompromising. Heavy tires screeched against the asphalt as a fleet of massive red fire engines, armored tactical vehicles from the Austin Police Department SWAT team, and white mobile command trucks from the Environmental Protection Agency aggressively jumped the curbs. They formed an impenetrable barricade of flashing red and blue lights, entirely sealing off the perimeter of the property. Heavily armed officers and firefighters in full protective turnout gear swarmed the main entrance, pushing against the tide of coughing, panicked executives pouring out of the building. The Austin fire chief, a towering man clutching a heavy steel Halligan bar, shoved his way through the shattered front doors. His voice boomed over a heavy-duty megaphone, cutting through the wailing alarms. "Everyone out right now. This entire facility is under emergency quarantine by the authority of the Austin Fire Department and the Environmental Protection Agency. All operations in this building are suspended indefinitely due to critical structural fire hazards and the unpermitted storage of toxic industrial chemicals. Move." Up on the stage, the smoke was thickening. Jackson was still standing right next to the useless red pedestal, completely frozen in a state of catatonic shock. The arrogant visionary from 10 minutes ago was entirely gone. His pristine limited edition sneakers were scuffed and wet from the sprinklers that had just engaged. His expensive designer hoodie was stained dark with greasy soot falling from the ceiling vents. He coughed violently, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring blankly at the ruins of his launch party, while the media cameras ruthlessly recorded every second of his humiliation. From the chaos of the flashing emergency lights outside, a sleek, silver luxury sedan pulled up right behind the police barricade. The rear door swung open, and Marcus stepped out, while everyone else was running, screaming, or covered in soot. My attorney looked immaculate in a bespoke charcoal suit. He adjusted his silk tie, entirely unbothered by the screaming sirens, and walked purposefully into the flooded, flashing lobby. Trailing right behind him was a uniformed county bailiff, clutching a thick leather portfolio. Marcus ignored the firefighters unspooling heavy hoses and marched straight up to the elevated stage. The press cameras instantly pivoted, sensing a new, compelling angle to the disaster. Marcus stopped at the edge of the platform, looking up at the coughing, disheveled CEO with a gaze of absolute freezing contempt. "Jackson." Marcus projected his voice, loud and flawlessly articulate, ensuring every single boom microphone captured his words over the background noise. "I represent Obsidian Holdings, the legal owner of this commercial property. You are hereby served with an emergency eviction order and a notice of absolute seizure." Jackson blinked rapidly, struggling to comprehend the words through the haze of smoke and panic. "What eviction?" "You cannot do this right now. My servers are down there." Marcus did not flinch. He coldly extended a heavily stamped legal document toward the boy. "Due to your malicious destruction of the structural and electrical integrity of this building and your reckless endangerment of human life, your commercial lease is terminated effective immediately. Your $40 million enterprise no longer possesses the legal right to occupy a single square inch of this space. As of this exact second, every piece of hardware, every server, and every asset inside this structure is officially seized to cover the massive damages you have caused. You are trespassing. Get off my client's property." By the time the sun rose the following morning, the financial massacre was complete. In less than 24 hours, the venture capitalists had entirely evaporated. The viral footage of the chaotic, smoke-filled lobby had caused every single angel investor to instantly pull their funding. Furthermore, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Fire Department had just levied millions of dollars in catastrophic fines against OmniVibe Wellness. The glass building was tightly wrapped in yellow caution tape, padlocked, and firmly back under the absolute control of my company. Desperate, cornered, and facing the utter ruin of his reputation, Jackson sought out the corporate address of Obsidian Holdings. He was hoping to grovel before the faceless landlord, begging for a chance to retrieve his custom servers to somehow salvage a fraction of his company. He was escorted to the penthouse floor of a high-rise downtown, a stark contrast to his ruined basement. The heavy oak doors of the executive suite swung open. The room was silent, commanding, and bathed in natural light. Jackson stood nervously in the center of the room. Behind the massive mahogany desk, a high-backed leather chair slowly swiveled around. I took a delicate sip of my Earl Grey tea, placed the porcelain cup on its saucer, and offered him a calm, serene smile. The color completely drained from his face, his knees visibly buckled. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The obsolete boomer he had humiliated and thrown out onto the street was actually the sovereign ruler of his entire universe. He broke down. Tears streamed down his pale cheeks as he sobbed, frantically pleading with me to let him take his server racks. He promised equity. He promised apologies. He begged for mercy. I let him cry until his voice turned hoarse. Then, I reached into the drawer of my desk. I pulled out a tiny, flat, unassembled cardboard box, roughly the size of my palm. I gently pushed it across the polished mahogany surface until it rested right in front of his trembling hands. "Pack your box, kid," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of an executioner. "As per the contract you signed, any hardware integrated into the electrical and plumbing framework during a structural violation is automatically forfeited to the landlord as collateral for damages. I am not just throwing you out on the street. I am legally keeping tens of millions of dollars of your processing equipment. You own absolutely nothing." Jackson stumbled backward. His spirit was entirely broken. He turned and walked out of the office like a hollow, soulless ghost, his empire reduced to dust. Once the door clicked shut, I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. Clara answered on the second ring, sounding exhausted. She was the only person who had looked at me with an ounce of genuine sympathy that day. I skipped the small talk and formally offered her the position of Chief Operating Officer at my property management firm. She accepted through tears of relief. I stood up and walked over to the expansive window. Looking down at the sprawling, sunlit skyline of Austin, the city was bustling with ambitious children chasing impossible valuations. I took one final satisfying sip of my tea. On the massive monitor behind me, the official bankruptcy filing for OmniVibe Wellness flashed across the news ticker. Order had finally been restored. Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for staying with me until the end of this journey. We would love to know where you are listening to this story from today, so please let us know down in the comments. If you enjoyed today's story and felt the satisfaction of justice being served, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the description and comment section of this video. Your generous support provides the essential budget to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue creating these incredible stories for you. Have a wonderful day.